All right. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This is a Noisy Reality production for December 1st, 2025. We're very pleased to have the co-directors of the American Revolution, which was done in collaboration with Florentine Films, all the great stuff that they do. This film is by Ken Burns, Sarah Botstein, and David Schmidt. And we're going to have a discussion today about the film itself. And first of all, I want to welcome Sarah and David to Noisy Reality. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Now,
Thanks for having
first of
us.
all, let me just make some introductions. Sarah, of course, has worked on jazz, the war, Prohibition, the Vietnam War, Hemingway, College Behind the Bars. She did a very provocative uh, documentary with U.S. and the Holocaust, which I recommend to everybody to read. And she recently finished working on this and is working now on one of our favorite presidents, Mr. Lyndon Baines Johnson. That must be a hoot to work on.
Hmm.
David Schmidt is a producer also with Ken Burns and Sarah Botstein on the American Revolution. And he's worked on the Roosevelts, the research on Vietnam War, won him the Jane Mercer Footage Researcher of the Year Award. And he's worked on the other great documentary on one of our great leaders of the revolution, Benjamin Franklin. So thank you so much for spending time to talk about it. First, I want to congratulate you. You did a hell of a job. Great work done on this particular film.
Thanks.
Uh, I just want to share with you some of my personal history. I come from a family that they're both on both sides of the family, they're members of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And my father was a professional soldier. When I came back from Europe in 1954, I was taken to Valley Forge by my grandparents, both my maternal and paternal grandparents. This is the first experience I had with the American Revolution. I'm 5 years old. And my maternal grandparents started to have a big fight. And I didn't know what the fight was about. And it turns out that they were fighting over who was more American than the other person because both of them had relatives at Valley Forge. And my aunt was in charge of the DAR in Orange County in California. So trust me, I rebelled against all that as I grew up. But I was exposed to essentially a hagiographic view of the revolution in the 1950s, which I rebelled against as an adult. And I want to congratulate you for incorporating the latest trends in historiography, that is slavery, Native Americans, looking at the war from a global point of view, women's history, the whole issue of loyalists, and of course, integrating, as all the films do, sort of a bottom up to top up approach of social history with the use of the voices, etc. And it's not going to be kumbaya completely today. Trust me. We will have some criticisms, but I want to congratulate you for doing that. So, first of all, tell us how you feel this whole series has been received by the public so far.
I mean, I think it's only a couple weeks old in the public's imagination, but we've been traveling the country since March, sharing excerpts of the film with different audiences, students, general audiences, everywhere from San Francisco to Texas and back again. And I think, pretty consistently, viewers are really interested in the history, in the complications, the ironies, the complexities. I don't love this word, but the nuances of how you tie how we work and tie, some of what you were just talking about in the film, the military narrative, which structures the film. You have the Battle of Lexington and Concord and the Battle of Yorktown as your military sort of beginning and end points, and then the terribly bloody war that goes on for all those years, juxtaposed to the stories of ordinary soldiers and civilians caught in the crossfire of a big war. And I think people from all kinds of backgrounds and all different ages have really loved learning the history and sort of getting a more hopefully clear-eyed view of it in this time that is so polarized.
What would you like to add to that, David?
You know, my experience listening to people who've seen the film is that they just really didn't know very much of this history.
Mm.
Um, I think all of us know something about the American Revolution virtually before we have any conscious thought, conscious memories anyway. It's on our flag, it's the 4th of July, Washington's on our currency. We all think about it some, but it's pretty superficial. We learn about it in school a little bit, and what we wanted to bring to the table wasn't to upset what we learned about in school necessarily, but to just give an awful lot more context. I think when we learn about it in elementary, middle, even high school, it's often in a U.S. survey, U.S. history survey class, where the teacher's worried you're not going to get to the 20th or 21st century if you give the revolution its due. So I think a lot of people realized, you know what, this is just a lot more information than I was aware of, and the stuff that I did know makes much more sense now that I can see it in its fuller context.
Now, let's talk about the time we're in. Obviously, when you begin to work in this, is 2015, correct?
Yes.
So it's a time when Hamilton's a great success. I don't particularly like Hamilton, but anyway, you know what? I mean, I don't like him personally as an individual, but of course, it's a brilliant musical. And we fast forward to the time we're in right now, and we are in a series of cultural memory battles extraordinaire with the kind of policies being implemented by the Trump 2.0 administration, attacks on history, taking one of their latest incidents was taking down plaques of black troops in Europe in World War II in the Netherlands, the stripping of the money from NPR and CPB and PBS, all this. And I know you guys weren't making the movie to have it come out in this particular time, but what also has been amusing was to watch people invoke the revolution. Mayor Wu of Boston invoked it in her resistance to all the deportation policies. And then, of course, you know, you have this constant issue about the founders. You know, what's the intent of the Constitution? And we'll just reflect on how you see here we're coming out with this 12-hour series that presents the American Revolution in a very different way than probably Project 1776 wants to do, coming out of the White House. And how do you see this helping educate people about the complexities of it? And I know Ken has a big sign complex. It's complex and all that. We named ourselves Noisy Reality simply because reality is noisy and dissonant. But how do you see this in the context of releasing this movie right now?
We honestly, this sounds hard to believe, but we honestly don't. We really put our heads down and try to make a good film that tells good history that transcends the moment that we're either making the film or the moment that we're in. So I think it is hard for audiences and people writing about the film to really understand that. Now, I'm not naive, and nor is David, nor is Ken or Jeff Ward. It's not like, you know, we went to Pluto and made the film. We're obviously living through a moment, and you're, you know, reading the newspaper and talking about this history in this current moment. But we really did try to transcend it because we want a film that our children will watch when they grow up, that stands the test of the moment, and will maybe give some context for us understanding, you know, what is happening and where we are right now as a country.
I
David?
also think, the film is 12 hours long. We're lucky that we had that much time to work with, and hopefully that we have your attention for those 12 hours. It's not, the revolution is something that cannot be reduced to a soundbite. And people do that and have done that for 250 years to invoke certain cherry-picked aspects of it to
Right.
further their point, whatever they want to argue. And people will be able to do that with this film if they want to. But what we ask and what we offer is a more expansive understanding of those 8 horrible years of war and the decades before and after of uncertainty.
Well, I've been producing radio and television and dealing with these history topics for 35 years, 40 years. And I always look in these films as great jump off points. They allow a mass education of the public to be exposed to different interpretations of the Civil War, World War II, jazz, baseball. I loved. I did 4 shows on baseball when that came out, and this show in particular to me is one which allows us to explore, particularly the last part of the final episode, the present with the Constitution being put forth, and again. to me, it's a jump off point to explore our history in depth, not to simply, because you can't get everything. You're not doing a 30-hour show. You're not doing a 40-hour show. It's impossible. But what kind of ideas did you um, talk about the process of creating, taking these ideas and visualizing them? Because when I was looking at how Ken, I was looking at some of the literature about how Ken has thought about conceiving movies over the past 30 years. And I go back to watching Brooklyn Bridge, which I thought was terrific years ago. Talk about how do you craft that? What's the process of crafting it? How do you take an idea and visualize it and thinking about how you're going to be aesthetically, cinematically, visual, and quote, beautiful, if you will, but at the same time, trying to portray this and explain an idea in a simple terms to the mass public. How do you describe that process?
Well, that's sort of at the heart of what we do. Put the history aside. That's the art of what we're doing, right? We're making hopefully a piece of art. It's a film. For this subject, we did not have the tools that we usually rely on, still photographs, archival material in the traditional sense, newsreel, radio. Um, so I think the aesthetic of the film, the way the film looks and feels, actually evolved over time. We tried different things. Our editors tried different things. Certain things were working, the high up drone shots, the moving cameras, filming through glass, filming through smoke, filming sort of very abstractly, the reenactments, trying to not have things feel so literal. And relying on live cinematography in ways that we don't normally rely on live cinematography. And the same with paintings. We didn't just use material that was contemporary to the events of the time, although we did pull in as much of that as we could and started with, in every instance, whether it's a person, a place, a thing, an event, what exists from the documentary record. And then we kind of go out from there to commissioning watercolors and CGI maps of Quebec and Trenton and Yorktown. So it's a lot of different visual elements, and the language and the feel and the look of the film really evolved over time. And I think we can't talk about that without talking about our extraordinary editors who go into their rooms for weeks on end, don't ever put their heads up and try to figure out, how does this painting go into this piece of live cinematography? How does it blend into this map, this piece of music, this lithograph, this voice? So that's really the heart of the art part of what we do. And that takes years.
Yeah, editors, of course, are so important. Go on, David. What do you want to add to that?
Ken often talks about our process as compares it to sculpting. That
Mm,
you have a block of marble and you're chipping away at it and you're chipping away at it. It's more subtractive than additive. And as Sarah was referring to other projects we've worked on from the 20th or 21st, well, mostly 20th century, where you have moving images and photographs. We don't have that for this, obviously, but we're so used to dealing with found images and found footage that we almost recreated that reservoir with the live footage that we shot. So we weren't going out and saying, okay, make this look like the Battle of Monmouth, cut, film it as though it's this sentence from episode 5. We just filmed these reenactments with these reenactors who we worked with on and off camera. And these people are so exceptionally in tune with the history.
mm.
We really, and not just with reenactors, with curators, with historians, librarians, other experts, we really relied on them. And you look at the end of each episode, the credits are a wall of names, all of whom are committed to our getting this story right. And it's not just those names either. It's all of the last 250 years worth of historians and artists who have, and the people who lived it themselves, who preserved this history for us. So it's just really a collaboration with hundreds of people alive today and thousands of people throughout all the generations.
Yeah, it's been my experience that the American Revolution reenactors are a special breed, different than the Civil War reenactors. They tend to be much more attuned and specialized. I've been watching them operate for 40 years.
They're very specialized. We learned
Yes,
a lot from them.
exactly. And they're not as it's not like, if you're in a Civil War reenactor, you have a sort of $1,000 uniform you buy. These guys are really into it. And I know a guy who was a lawyer who is a reenactor of the American Revolution, and he sits there and will sit there and talk about in great detail everything that happened with this particular New York Continental Regiment. It's just amazing to listen to. But what struck me was when you're going into the scholarship, tell me how you select how you're going to work with different trends of scholarship or not. Because when I look at the Middlemarch film that was done in 1997, I reviewed that, the Liberty series, and that sort of reflects a certain state of historiography about the Revolutionary War. That was sort of, if you have Bernard Bailyn in there, and that was sort of, you had a lot of students of Bernard Bailyn. You had Pauline Mayer, who's deceased, etc. But that sort of reflect a sort of picture of the Civil War, of the Revolutionary War that was sort of at that time au courant. But now you're talking about looking at a subject that has another 30 years of scholarship on it. And so what are you including or excluding in terms of main ideas to convey about the revolution?
I mean, I don't think either Sarah or I are experts on historiography. And I also would say that there wasn't an intention to exclude anything. We were trying to bring in as many people and as many ideas as we could. I think we were pretty influenced by maybe Alan Taylor's book, American Revolutions, which
Sure.
takes a continental approach, and certainly several others. I took classes from Colin Calloway in college. He told me American history doesn't make any sense without American Indian history, which of course is true, but it's never truer than with this story, I don't think. Um, so there was intention to include people, but it wasn't perhaps as intentional as grabbing this strand and that strand and this strand. It was what feels like the fulsome story here. What are we missing? What are the historians that we work with think we are missing? And they're all, colleagues of each other. Some of them had never met, but some of them had. Some of them had, recommended we talk to somebody else that they had worked with or hadn't. We did interview Bernard Bailyn before he passed. We interviewed Gordon Wood on the same day, who was one of Bernard Bailyn's students. But we also interviewed Friederike Bayer, who's one of Gordon Wood's students, and is certainly a much younger scholar of the Hessian aspects of the war. It's tremendous presence in this film. I just think it was voices that we were attracted to that they were telling the story in new and interesting ways, or in old and interesting ways that helped tell the story in this more fulsome way. I keep using that word. More than it was grabbing at particular ideas of historiography.
Got it. Although it is interesting to see how you grapple with these, because in looking at all the interviews that have been done, I've been reading lots of them for the past couple of weeks. They do stress the issue of Native Americans. I didn't know you had Colin Conway as a professor, um, and and one thing I would say that's an interesting thing that you did not include was going further into India, which there is scholars who talk about how if you look at the period from 1763 to 1775, the whole issue of the empire revolving around the consolidation of India is an interesting subject to explore. And again, one has to make choices about what to do because you're going to do 20 hours, 25
Right.
hours. And then another question is the Iroquois Confederacy issue, which is one that I found very amusing in some of the conservative critiques, because there's a quote of Conestoga is done in 1744. The Albany Conference is 1754. And if one looks at Roger Williams, when Roger Williams is in exile in New England, and that's in the late 17th century, and nevertheless, that influences John Locke when he writes his account. So one could go into all that detail, but I was sort of amused that some of the conservative critics have said, oh, the hell with it. They're just talking about Native Americans. It has to be the National Review article and some of the others just said, oh, the hell with that. Let's just ignore that. And that I felt was sort of amusing, to say the least, because it just excluded all these instances of scholarship that do indeed point out to the fact that the Iroquois Confederacy was not something these guys ignored. It
Right.
just you don't have to get into that, but I'm just sort of
Well, I just
curious.
say that I think people are reading intention when it's not there, and
Yeah,
that's I don't know what else to say beyond that. The Albany Congress, what I think that scene is about union.
right.
Here is a union that predates the United States that was threatened, maybe even broken during the Revolution. And here's a failed attempt at a union of the colonies before the revolution. That union was made possible by the revolution. So it's kind of just setting the stage for union as a theme throughout the series, more than it is saying this begat this. That was never the intention.
Right,
Yeah, that's
obviously.
sort of what a prologue is in any of our big series about war. It's like a little tease of some idea that we're going to think about or we want our audiences to pay attention to. And that for us was about union, the centrality of Native history when it comes to the revolution, not specifically about that.
So, in terms of structure, one of the articles that I read was in a Journal of American History where Ken actually talks about technique. And, he mentions the term telegrams and things like this. And I was wondering what you have to say about the actual, just before we turn to other people jumping in the fray here, the actual aesthetics of production that you guys get into when you're trying to convey these historical ideas in detail. Because he introduced the idea of telegrams, to have somebody telegram an idea or something like that. And I'm just curious,
Yeah.
and that was a
Well,
very insight. Yeah.
telegram actually, Ken doesn't mean telegram an idea. What Ken means when he says telegram is let's take, it's like a little bead on a string and drop it into the middle of an episode that isn't necessarily about everything else you're hearing about. It's a way of signaling something that is important to the story and to the history that doesn't exactly fit in the puzzle of that moment.
That it could
So
go in another
it could
place.
go in another place. It's sort of a floatable moment. Trying to think like
I'll give you an
the
example. The
flag
the
or
flag, right? So
yeah.
the flag of the United States was adopted in I think June of 1777. We had it exactly in chronological order,
Mm.
and it didn't have anything to do with the scenes that came before or after. It just happened to happen in 1777. We ended up moving the idea of the flag to create a moment of respiration between endless battles that are happening in 1777. So we had to change the tenses. We had to say back in June, you're not going to see it on battlefields. It also was a moment not just about 1777 because we're talking about how there was no standard design throughout the war and there's no proof that it flew on a battlefield. But anyway, that's kind of what Ken refers to as a telegram. It's something that helps with that you need to have in the series, but that could go in not doesn't have to go in the same place, and it can be moved to a different spot within the episode or perhaps the series to help with the fatigue a viewer might be feeling or something else with the momentum of the series.
I see, sort of like a module in a history essay or something like that. Now, the idea of storytelling is interesting too. Um, And the way I've seen and read how Ken defined it is a way to break down binary thinking. Is that accurate? Would you say that, when you take storytelling, you take an individual, and this individual can highlight a greater set of themes through the personal experience. But tell us how the storytelling process, how you guys understand how that's used in the films.
I mean, I think we're all attracted to good stories. Good stories usually involve interesting people. So biography is also at the center of history, and trying to understand what motivates the different characters in the series. So we don't have a lot of philosophical conversations like you're suggesting in your question. We really are we build the show chronologically, we build it artistically, and we are all interested in good stories. And good stories help us tell the history. And those are often biographical or just crazy, absurd, ironic twists and turns of life and, in this case, battles or politics.
Right.
It's
And you're
not, it's not, we don't like sit around in an academic seminar kind of thinking about the philosophy behind it. We really move forward in a chronological way, and then stop and kind of have historians help us, as you were saying earlier in your questions, think about ways to talk or think about the stories you've just heard.
People have often asked me what I want viewers to get from this film? And the answer is I'd love for them to watch it, and to get something from it, but that something is going to be different for any individual. And at the end of the day, if all they get is that they've heard a good story, that's still worthwhile. And this is one heck of a story. It is really crazy what
All
happened here
right.
250 years ago.
Right, right. All right. Well, let me bring on other people. Everybody, you know the drill. Raise your little hands there, and then we'll bring in other voices and questions. Anybody have a question to ask of both David and Sarah? Just raise your hands, and I'll bring you in there. Go on, Alex.
Yeah. Again, I just want to agree with Jim first on, that you guys did a great job. Although, of course, like you said, well, being a French historian, of course, I would have loved for a little more emphasis, on that and the, European context of the revolution in general. I was thinking about, Barbara Tuchman's great book, The First Salute, which gets into a lot of, and of course that specific story about, how I think it's I forget which Dutch colony it is, in the Caribbean, that kind of made the first,
St.
that's where the title
Eustatius.
comes from.
Right.
But the question I want to ask is about the battle graphics that you guys used, in terms of like who did that, but also again how you guys compile, again, because obviously a lot of, Brooklyn looks very different now from what it did in 1776. So I'm just curious how you did the research of, putting together those maps, and also, in general, like, who the people behind that, and how it was done too, which again I thought was very nice. Obviously, this is something you kind of haven't done with your previous. I mean, I can't even Vietnam. I don't
No.
Vietnam.
The maps on this show are, one of the biggest lines in our budget, one of the hardest things that we had to figure out, one of the most painstakingly difficult things that we did, actually. So, this incredible team of producers and researchers on our side. There are three types of maps in the show, just for listeners and people to think about when you're watching. There are the archival maps of the period, which are great pieces of documentary evidence. They were contemporary to the time. They're made by beautiful artists, and they are very political in what they're saying, and they're not always accurate. So we're actually getting some feedback about how an archival map is wrong. Well, we didn't correct the archival map because it's an archival map, but yes, it's wrong. So the archival maps we use, and we sometimes overlay, which Ken has done in all of his films about war, with red and blue arrows to sort of help the viewer quickly understand where to look on the map and what it means militarily. So that's the archival piece. Then we worked with a wonderful cartographer and his team, and we built 18th century North America along the eastern seaboard over a 2.5 year period of time. Where were the roads? Where were the rivers? This was before damming. How did the mountain ranges impact? What is the geography of this landscape that we're going to be living in over the 6 nights? And a wonderful graphic artist who lives in Brooklyn, Molly Schwartz, and her team worked with the cartographers to build that and then create watercolors. Everything is hand painted. It's a very handmade, very detail oriented, very carefully done thing. And you have that map wide, medium, and very close, where you see trees and almost wagons. I mean, it's really intimate. And then we worked with an incredible company in London called 422 Graphics, and they built a full CGI world, which we've also never done. And you see that in Quebec and in Trenton, at the retreat from the Battle of Long Island, and in Yorktown. So maps are at the heart of sort of visually how we figured out how to tell the story, and a totally different and much bigger, both financial piece of the show, but artistic piece of the show. And we did get something wrong, which we're fixing. So even in all of that, so it's that was a really, really, really important part of the visual and
One of the things
intellectual
that
content.
I know Sarah and I really cared about was restoring as much as we could native villages, settlements, towns, that we if we knew where they were, And we had to pick a date too because people were moving throughout this period. So we're just like, okay, 1775, put people on the map where they were, if we know. And so you'll see, west of the Appalachians and east of the Appalachians, but particularly west of the Appalachians, you'll see a lot of Indian towns, and also Indian nations in a different font, superimposed over the regions in which those people were dominant.
Yes, excellent job. You're dealing with a bunch of military historians here, so we both all appreciate what you did. And I have to admit that I remember years ago when they remaindered the Atlas of the Revolution at Barnes and Noble. It was sold for $6. How's that for a price? That big, thick book, which unfortunately, maybe you'll, because of the success of this, you'll probably be able to get it reissued. But anyway, that was an amazing thing. Michael, go on, Michael. Michael, you need to unmute.
Yes, I have. Yeah, I have to say that I thought it was a wonderful show. It did a great job, and yes, I agree that no one retelling of the story can be seen as the definitive or the only version that should be seen, but should be seen as a starting point. And I think you articulated that either intentionally or unintentionally at the end of the series when it said that basically the revolution was ongoing. And if the revolution is ongoing, certainly the discussion of the revolution is ongoing. But my question is, what, as far as getting the history, the accuracy of the history, what choices did you have to make? Because we're going back to a period, as you said, where there are no photographs. There is less documentation, it's accessible documentation. How did you decide which items were actually at least closest to being factual? And also, how did you balance the idea of storytelling? Because we know that that Shakespeare, going back to Shakespeare,
Yes.
storytelling has to be balanced with accuracy and vice versa. How did you do that?
Well, Shakespeare didn't mind taking liberties that we would never felt comfortable making.
No.
Sorry to tell you.
Yeah.
Was watching the Henry ad recently and checking it, as I'm sure some people watching our film were doing, checking against Wikipedia, and turns out not all that. Falstaff's not a real guy. Okay, so to answer your question, there's no one size fits all for how to check things. But we really did rely on our panel of advisors, who read the script before it was a film, who watched the film before it was a real film, and who watched the film as it got closer to locking, and again in the last stages when we were pretty much finished. When it comes to a lot of the received wisdom of the revolution, I guess is the example I can give you. We don't know who said, if anybody, don't fire till you see the whites of their eyes. So we just didn't do that story. We don't know for sure that Nathan Hale said, I have but one life to live to give for my country. And if he did, he's quoting Cato anyway. So we just said what we knew, which was that somebody said, I can't even remember, but what one witness said about him going to the gallows. John Paul Jones is said to have said, I have not yet begun to fight, but there's no evidence of that from 1779. So instead we went with what he said. I remember replying in the most determined negative. So we went back as close as we could to the moment of when it happened. But we also really relied on the testimony of the witnesses itself, or the people who either waged or witnessed this war themselves. So when you're hearing from Joseph Plum Martin, he's writing that well after the war. But we felt comfortable including that. And we know from his pension records and from other records that he was in all the places he said he was. When you're hearing from Betsy Ambler, there's some stuff that she's writing in 1780 and 81. But most of the stuff that you're hearing, she wrote in 1809, 1810. And I don't know, we don't feel like we were trying to trick anybody with that. There's a combination of memoir and diary and general orders and newspaper articles. And, at some level, it's what this person is reporting. and the viewer needs to, as much as the filmmaker needs to say, testimony is imperfect. We can't even get instant replay right in football, and we've got a million cameras on it. So I don't know if that answers your question entirely, but it's not a one size fit all is all I can really say about that.
Yeah, no, you did. And basically what you're saying is you did it to the best
That we can.
possible, right?
Yeah.
Humanly possible.
Yeah, and we did a pretty rigorous fact checking round afterwards too, not even involving that panel of historians. And of course, we had a question, we'd reach out to them, but we got pretty local on the numbers and whatever. And we learned from Vietnam, numbers of body counts can be inaccurate.
No.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, any other questions? Any other comments? Anybody else? Yes. Come on, Gail. Unmute.
I'm not a military historian. I'm an art historian. But I'm curious, did you read a lot of 18th century newspapers?
I did, yeah. Mostly, I would say it was stuff that was from a footnote in somebody else's work, and then I'd go read the whole essay or letter. that was
David is a great
produced.
footnote chaser.
Yeah, but
So that
sometimes it was
sounds
just,
fun.
hey, how was this reported? When did Williamsburg find out about Lexington? Stuff like
Mhm.
that the nerd in me just couldn't but dig deeper.
Where did you read them?
Redex
Or
mostly.
how? Read
Yeah.
it?
Redex historical imprints, American historical newspaper imprints was the best source. And then I think we used the Gale resource for
Right.
18th,
Right.
17th, 18th century English newspapers.
So you didn't read the real newspapers. You
Oh,
read,
physically go
Yeah.
handle them with my hand? I don't think I did, sadly.
Well, sadly, only I say this because I have degrees from Columbia University, and I'm an art historian, so I get really upset. About 30 years ago, maybe more even, Columbia University microfilmed all their 18th century newspapers. I don't know if you've heard this. They threw them out
Oh boy.
because they decided that if you
What
microfilm something,
Well,
that's
what a New
eternal.
York story.
Yeah.
Let's go
Isn't
pave
that
over all our
bad?
history.
I shouldn't say
Well,
that, but
well,
there's
we
no
should
one.
because Sarah went to Barnard. I'm sure she has
Okay,
lots
so
of
there's
stories.
no one who goes to
Yeah, she knows
Columbia
about this
University who
kind of
doesn't
stuff.
complain about it, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I fit right. Anyway, I also
Amazing.
wondered where you got some of those maps. Did the old print shop help you, or did you go to New York Public?
So we looked at the old print shop just to get some ideas, but it actually turns out that there's the David Rumsey collection. Mount Vernon has
Mount Vernon has amazing
Library of
maps.
Congress.
New York Public
Um,
Library.
And New York Public Library, and there's often multiple versions of the same map because they were printed, different shading by different people. Fascinating stuff that,
You
and
showed the best one, I thought. I mean, I don't know a lot about it. I know the people at the old print shop pretty well, but that one that which extends
Oh,
way
yeah.
beyond
That's
the.
that's the
incredible,
Colonial
right?
Williamsburg.
Isn't that great? I think you
Colonial
can
Williamsburg
buy
has
it.
a
It's
great
very
department.
expensive
Well-
if there's any copies in private hands.
But that sort of gets to Sarah's
You
comment
need that.
about 18th century political cartography,
Yeah.
which is just, when you sit there, because I've been to the Clements Library and they got all this stuff. It's
Clements
like
Library, yep.
mind blowing to see. Because you're
But
also dealing with a bunch of map freaks here too. I got to tell you.
And me too. That
Yeah.
map that you're referring to, which is in episode 1 when Maggie Blackhawk is talking about how
Maps are
present an
political.
argument
Yes,
more than a
right.
conclusion. And they're saying where people want to go. If you look carefully on that map, which you might even not be able to on the screen, but we can send you the link. It's at Colonial Williamsburg has it. If you look carefully on that map, not only is there, red shading of Virginia out past the Mississippi, but underneath that red shading is Osages, is Cherokee, they
Right.
know the people are
Right.
there, but they still want dominion over them.
Right. Well, I know Michael Whitkin, who is one of your consultants. I've actually taken his class on this period of time. So it was quite a mind blower to actually have this dealt in detail. I thought I knew a lot about that, but boy, did I learn a lot from that.
Yeah.
It's and that's one of the great strengths of what you did. You basically put Native Americans into the picture, which generally are excluded in the past.
Bizarrely. It's very
And
weird.
yeah, it's totally weird. And if people get pissed off about that, the hell with it, frankly. And
Yeah,
that's my
and
opinion.
and
It's
one
not good
defense I would
history.
have to that is it's not. I mean, we didn't put anybody back into the picture;
Right.
they were in the picture.
Yeah, but you know what I'm
And
talking about.
I
They
do know
tend
what
to
you're
be
talking about,
weird.
but
Yeah.
that might be, the to me the obviousness of it is in the words and the actions of somebody like George Washington, who this story is obviously about, is thinking about the West, is sending armies into the West. So
Well, yeah, and in a way, I was sort of entertained with how you dealt with the whole, him being dispatched and essentially provoking the 7 Years' War, because we know the true story is he's sent by Governor Dinwiddie to go out there and basically survey all this land that they're all going to buy, that they're going to come in. And you sort of put that a little later in the story, but what really happened, of course, was he's going out there to survey this massive tract of land that he bought. And I would say the interesting thing about Washington was also, of course, what happens after the Braddock campaign, because he then learns his trade pretty thoroughly as the commander of the Virginia Regiment of Militia when he launches that campaign to take Fort Duquesne, which, again, these are things that people can jump off with and
yeah.
explore with what you
Right.
do. Anyway, other questions or comments? I know we got a lot of high verbal people here, and I'm sort of shocked that I'm not seeing them raise their hands. Robert or Aaron. Oh, go on. Well, no, Michael. I want to get somebody who hasn't said anything. Anybody else? Who's up there? Okay, Frank. Go on, Frank. You got to unmute, Frank. Frank, unmute. All right. Yeah, there. Frank, did you get it? Oh, Frank, where did Frank go?
He
just.
keeps moving around on my boxes.
Oh, Frank, are you there? Okay, Frank.
Am I still here? Am I here
Yeah,
or
yeah.
not?
There you go, Frank. Go on. You got a
Oh,
little
I'm sorry. I
artillery piece
apologize
there.
for that.
Go
Yeah.
on.
This is just an observation, which is, I think, relevant to today more than any time but previous. If you go through AI and you've got, you prompt your way through, you can get a different take depending on which prompts you choose. Because if you want a narrative that concentrates on what it is to be a patriot and who said what when, that's one thing. But if you're looking at it, say from the way I just did it, where was the money and who was giving the gunpowder, and you see St. Eustatius and then you see Robert Morris, he's the money bags, and this is well before Concord. So it's interesting in that there's grievances on a geopolitical scale with the Dutch, and of course following the Treaty of Paris of 1763, you've got Spain and France with a compact ready to go at it. You know, it's interesting how what you've done is, I don't. This is not to be belittling, but it's old school. I'm thinking that going forward, there will be a lot of this sort of thing, quite possibly on YouTube, where people have, they've gone a certain route, and it may actually go away from previous narratives. I don't know if that helps at all, but what do you think about that?
I don't have much experience with AI. I'll say I tried to use it to help me with the bibliography, because we had thousands of books that we had read through, to say where the place and date of publication was, and it couldn't do that. I mean, it would give me an answer, but it would give me the wrong answer.
Yeah,
And
we
that
didn't
was
really use AI
and that
at
was
all making this
forwarding
film.
what I believe to be the worst characteristics of human beings, which is confidently incorrect. And so I don't know what you're going to get when you ask AI certain things, but it sounds like from what you're saying, Frank, that you can have it answer however you want. And that's not what we want to present. We want to have more. Again, you're right. This couldn't be definitive, but it is going to give people more of a bedrock that is true and that they can maybe share because it is their shared history. And of course, you can pick it apart and you can grab certain things and emphasize them and all of that. But I don't love the continued siloing that it sounds like these AI prompts could allow you to have.
Yeah.
Yeah, and very interesting. And also, I think one thing that I was struck with was when you talk about Fortin, James Fortin, and then you talk about you mentioned Lemuel Haynes,
Mhm.
and these people are. I mean, you could do a whole documentary on abolitionism. You could do a whole documentary series on the Constitution because one of the critiques I had when I reviewed the Civil War was always said, "Wait a minute, it stops in 1865. What about Reconstruction?" I get you're doing something along the lines to handle that critique from many years ago, but it can't. You can't do everything. So,
You can't, and they couldn't agree back then what the revolution was or when it was. John Adams
well,
famously said it was over before the war started. I don't agree with him, but he had his point, and we could have gone any which way. We decided to center it on the war, on the stuff that led to the war, and on what the war really was. I feel like the Bill of Rights is a real
right,
consolidation of what the
right.
war was fought over. So we wanted to go there.
Right. Well, I have to tell you, I'm going to review Gregory Nobles, who did a historiographical book on the American Revolution, and his comment is nobody still agrees about it. So it's sort of like you talk about complicated. I think of Peter Giles' famous quote, "History is an argument without end," and that's what goes on. Aaron, go on, Aaron.
Thank you, Jim. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we got
Yeah.
you, man.
Okay, great. No, thank you. And once again, thank you, Sarah and David, for an incredible project. I mean, the scope and scale, it's a very long time typically to do anything like this, and I'm sure you guys are happy to get your lives back to some degree. Um, as someone who lives in New Jersey, I'm not there right now. I'm in California till for another week, but I'm part of the New Jersey historical society, and New Jersey gets this like it does in modern life, get kind of passed over a lot, and
And
so
not
we're doing.
anymore, I hope. New Jersey is the heart of the show.
Yeah, exactly. So I wanted to bring that up, and that so in New Jersey we're doing a thing called 250 for 250, right? So 250 revolutionary sites for the 250th, because obviously whatever percentage you want to pick, 20, 40, 50% of revolution was really sort of fought in the
Yeah.
scope of New Jersey.
New Jersey has 250 sites,
Yeah.
Yeah,
which not
exactly.
everybody
And I
does.
mean, I live in Teaneck, and Hackensack. I'm like
Yeah.
right there, the confluence of that area. So we've got like Washington camped, 4 blocks from my kid's school back in the day. And so I'm wondering, when it comes to working with these sources at the state level. So I'll pick New Jersey, where you have the state library, the old barracks museum, um, the tools like Jersey Clicks. I don't know if you use those. Like, just maybe talk a little bit about how it was, or how you worked with these sort of state resources, and you pick whatever state, obviously,
No,
that
I think New
maybe you
Jersey's a
live in.
great state. I think um,
Thank you.
give a shout out to our amazing co-producer Megan Ruff, who is on her way back from France right now, but she spent a lot of time in New Jersey. We worked with a lot of the historical societies, historic
Yeah.
sites, the reenactment groups, and over the course of 4 years, really did try to make sure we went to places where we might film, but also where we did the research. And because we are in New York City, it's also really convenient and easy. And I think actually an unsung in our imagination, we think about Boston, we think about Virginia, we sort of think about New York, although I don't think most people understand that this was a loyalist stronghold for a very,
Yep.
very long time.
Yep.
And they're really surprised when they hear how long the loyalists stayed here. So I think New Jersey will, with people who watch the film, get its due. I think in terms of the maps that we've been talking about, some of the great archival maps are from New Jersey, even one that has something wrong in it we discovered this weekend, but also the maps that we made really focus on. I think one of Ken's favorite maps is where you see Hackensack, Aquaquinock, all the different
Yep.
towns that get lit up and where everyone is going. So there were a lot of historical societies, historical organizations, battlefields, places, houses, buildings. We really did use a lot of those resources.
Yeah.
And we
Oh,
filmed at
that's
the old
great.
barracks in Trenton. And
Yeah.
people know Trenton, but they don't
Yeah.
know
Yeah.
Morristown and Monmouth and
Yes,
even Princeton and
Yeah,
Fort
I mean,
Lee and
most people have no idea there's a Washington Museum in Morristown, like
right.
right
No,
off of 80
exactly.
yeah,
right there.
and
Like they
that's
literally
national
don't know that.
park.
Yeah, that's right.
Territory.
But I think Monmouth is state.
Yeah.
And they were great, and they had
No,
the
no.
biggest reenactment. And
One quick follow-up. Working with any types of indigenous source historical societies or interpretive centers, did you, I mean, maybe if you could go into that
not
process
specifically in
too,
New
that'd be great.
Jersey,
No, no,
but
I get
we
it.
worked
Yeah.
closely with the Cherokee film office,
Which is in
including
Oklahoma.
Jen Lauren, who is, I don't know what her title is, but she runs it, and she's incredible. And she came to a screening, and they licensed us some footage um, and some artwork as well. We also worked with the Stockbridge Muncie community out in Wisconsin, and various people did we talk to about licensing images.
Right. And then, of course, we have the scholars, Ned and Maggie Blackhawk, but
Michael
Kathleen
Wittgen,
Duvall, Michael Wittgen.
Ned
Phil
We
Blacklock.
either
Laguardia,
study Native American history. Phil Deloria is obviously sort of
Right.
Darren Bonaparte.
major character, Darren Bonaparte, some of whom are Native in their origin and some
Right.
of whom are not, but study the history.
And you had Ned too.
Yeah.
Yeah, Michael, you'll have the last question, Michael.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's really two questions, but the second one probably is a good wrap-up question. The first one is, I mean, one of the overriding things that I got from the show was it goes back to the witticism, you're going to have freedom of choice whether you want it or not. The idea that it was a matter of great words and great ideas that were not necessarily put into execution due to the limitations of the people involved or the circumstances. And the revolutions, obviously, you did manage to very well portray the fact that revolutions are very bloody, messy, terrible things. But I was wondering if that was one of the overriding points that you wanted to get through, which is the difference between the words and the ideas and what actually happens in execution of those words and ideas. And the other thing is that I know that, for instance, I mean, when I first read the play The Devil's Disciple by George Bernard Shaw, he had an appendix which had Burgoyne's terms of surrender at Saratoga. So using that as an example, how far outside of the box did you go in doing your research? Not just to standard research areas, but to areas where you would not necessarily would think that you would get information.
I'll take the research question first and then toss the other one to David, who is nodding his head as if he had something smart to say. No, I think, one of the fun research things that we do on any project, even if it's not the 18th century, is follow tiny little breadcrumbs to try to find something, whether it's a portrait of something or a better quality image of something. So for this film, we had two of our associate producers who I think were chasing family lineage to figure out, like, okay, who has the best painting, or is there a painting, or is there a portrait, and how many different places and museums, historical societies, auction houses, how can we find this? So one of the last things we photographed is a very beautiful portrait of Esther Reed, who it was a beautiful, beautiful moment at the end of the Declaration of Independence, and we found her descendants who happened to have taken that painting out of storage and moved it to Claverack, New York, and we went and photographed it. So we actually photographed a lot of the art ourselves. So that happened to be in upstate New York, but Rosie went to far off flung places in England, Ireland, I think the Roger Lamb material. I mean, there's lots of
Roger Lamb, yeah, great.
I mean,
Oh,
those
yeah.
watercolors are just unbelievable.
Yeah.
Working with Don Haggis in the Journal of the American Revolution, just follow these tiny breadcrumbs to get to the closest we could to original source material was a fun answer to your question about research outside the box, not just in terms of the content of the show, but how we're visualizing it.
It was really hard to find authentic representations of
Yeah.
Benedict Arnold.
Oh my
And
God,
that
with the pin.
isn't so surprising given that post-war American artists didn't have access to him. And even if they did, they wouldn't have wanted to commemorate him so much, but there's a couple paintings that really have not seen the light of day, that are in private collections in England that we were able to surface. And we had to frame him in such a way that you couldn't see his red coat for the first 5 episodes.
And then we found another one at the very end. So
And then we
yeah.
found another one at the very end. So to your other question, um, Sarah and Ken have made multiple films about war. Sarah and Ken worked on World War II, and I worked on the Vietnam War with them, and of course Ken has worked on the Civil War. Wars are really messy. They're awful. We know from all the work we did on Vietnam, with the photos and the footage, how awful it can look. And digging through the testimonies of the people who lived through this war, particularly Joseph Plum Martin, whose testimony from Mud Island from Fort Mifflin is like almost exactly the same experience that Roger Harris had at Compiègne in
Right.
1967. It's why I'm so grateful to him for writing his memoir, because he already knew that it was being remembered in a way that wasn't truthful. The war, that is. Maya Jasanoff says it really well at the top of our third episode. The United States came out of violence. That is obviously true. This is a war that created the United States, but it's just not something that we often think about. And so when we heard her say that, I think we were already knew that, but it really did flip a switch. And we wanted to flip a switch in the viewer's head too, but we also wanted to make it true in what you've seen to date through the first 2 episodes and what you're going to see through the rest of the series. So that's the big thing, I think. This is not just the men in Philadelphia signing the documents. So they're taking enormous risks in doing so. It's not just George Washington, who's really gambling a lot, with his choice to make this war. It's the rank and file people who fought the war. It's the people in the cities who suffered through the war. I mean, all the major cities are occupied during the Revolution. That's not the case with any of the other American wars. And it's also, of course, people in Indian country, enslaved people in the American South. It's on the Gulf Coast. It's overseas. This is violent. And when you get that, I think the Declaration, which wasn't the independence wasn't the goal at the outset, but it comes into being because of what had happened in that first year plus of war and what it took to win that war. Union was not the goal at the outset, but again, it's a product of what happened, and of course the Republic, and then the Bill of Rights that comes out of it. The Declaration, the Constitution, and particularly the Bill of Rights mean much more when you know what people went through in order to make those documents required.
Oh, well, that's a good way to end this. Now, what are you going to work on next? What are you working on now?
LBJ and the Great Society.
And that's going to be 10 hours, 12 hours, or just
It'll be
6
three,
hours?
it's going to be 3 nights, we think, but hard
3
to know.
nights.
We're just at the start of that project. I have a 1:30 call, so I have to jump off. I'm very sad to say.
But well, no,
Ah.
but that's fine. I want to thank you guys so much for joining
Thank you,
us.
Jim.
Thank you so
Thank
much. It was a
you.
great
Thank you.
pleasure.
Really
Oh,
nice to meet
thank
you all.
you.
Thank
Yeah,
you
you
for
have
watching.
a great day. Thank you
You
so
too.
much.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Bye.
Bye. Well, that was fun.
Thank you, Zeke.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. And just let me know if there's any additional materials I can provide.
You can provide me with the winning lottery number for today, Zeke.
Oh, yeah, I would like that one too.
Yeah, they were terrific. I'm sure you're having a lot of fun with them doing this stuff around the country.
Definitely. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Always a pleasure to listen in on these conversations.
Yeah. Yeah,
Let
great.
me, let me say something. I just wanted to chime in because I didn't get, there wasn't enough time to say it there. But what they did for the past hour and how they described it, what they did and how they put together the show has given me, for one, far more confidence in the show and a far greater appreciation of not only what went into it, but how accurate it was. So I thought it was a great idea to do this.
Well, yeah, well, it's Zeke is from Dan Cloris, which has handled the Dan Flores. You guys have handled his movies for what, 20 years, right? 25 years?
I think probably around there. Yeah, I mean, I'm only 24, so.
Ah, All right. Well, I remember you were, I don't know who did the Civil War, but I know I had to start to deal with you guys, I guess with jazz.
That sounds
So,
about right.
yeah, so that's when I think you started doing it. And what interests me is the grass, the really, this is a 9-month marketing campaign. We're not recording this, by the way.
You didn't
So
record it
no. Well, I know, of course I recorded it,
because a lot of
but
people couldn't do it at
no. But
12:30
I
on
will
Monday
edit this out, Zeke. But
of this.
it's very interesting that that was what was done, and also with the Vietnam series, the not really extensive grassroots advertising campaign. Basically, I personally think to make sure that the amount of criticism is dealt with in early on. Because this is another controversial subject to deal with. Everybody has all sorts of different takes about the American Revolution, and and this is certainly a way to deal with that. And I don't have to tell you that next year, with who knows what's going to happen with how Trump's going to do the 250th anniversary, but we know it's not going to be like this series was. Let's put it that way.
There's no Operation Sail.
It will
The way
definitely
they
be
did it in
interesting.
1776 with all those
Yeah,
great schooners and ships
that's
coming
true.
up
Yeah,
the Hudson.
no,
That was fabulous.
she's right. The bicentennial was very cool because they had all those ships go up the Hudson. That was very super cool. But that was a big party in New York City. In fact, that's the first time I ever went to a party and met the original cast of Saturday Night Live, and I didn't even know what I was doing. So that shows you how different it was. Anyway,
Well, we're in a much more precarious time. So
yeah,
especially considering the American experiment. So that's why one of the things I appreciated about the show was the way they ended it. One of the things I
right.
appreciated most was the way they ended it. And I think that, yeah, the show will become more important, even though they didn't intend it when they started that. Excuse me, when they started, they didn't intend it to become that relevant. It was more universal and it was supposed to be timeless, which I think it is. But it will become more relevant just for its accuracy.
Well,
Just for the fact that
Who thought?
it's all primary sources. It's very obvious from
well,
listening to them.
who thought?
Primary sources drove the narrative. That's
Yeah,
why it's so good.
Yeah, but who thought that Trump was going to be elected president in 2015? Nobody. And then, of course, Ken makes that really heavy-duty speech at Stanford in June of 2016. He basically blasts Trump basically boom, like what are we doing? We're going to elect this guy to be president of the United States.
Wait, who said that?
Ken Burns. Ken Burns
He did?
he made a commencement
heard
speech.
that.
Oh yeah, he made a
Wow.
commencement speech at Stanford.
Wow.
But what they're doing here is obviously, as Sarah and David said, they're making their movie about the American Revolution. They're not thinking about all this. But unfortunately, it's coming out at a time when, bam, you've got this tremendous contestation about what does it mean to be an American. And that's where this is going to be an interesting thing to watch how people process it.
I think one of the best points they made, for me anyway, was that everybody was speaking different languages. They couldn't understand each other.
Right.
That's a wild concept.
Well, that's true, though. That's true.
Well, I'm sure it is, but
Am I audible on here?
Yes, Rob. Yes, Rob.
Oh yeah, my observation was if you contrast the original Ken Burns Civil War back in the early 1990s to today, I mean, there's so much more access today to video and online resources, which you didn't have in the early 1990s. So that the reaction
I can't hear you, Roger.
To this production is certainly different than it was to the reaction today to this production is certainly different than what it was, for the Ken Burns Civil War back in the early 1990s. You didn't have access to all the online video and this is a lot more information out there now than there was back when the Civil War was done. And I think the Civil War probably made a bigger impression at that time than this production probably makes at this time.
But we're not sure about that. There's no doubt 40 million people watched the first Civil War series. But and we don't know what the stats are for this. I don't know. Zeke, have you gotten any Nielsen's from this yet? Probably not.
I don't think yet.
Yeah, so but I would think we're talking about large numbers.
They're
Um,
replaying it already.
yeah, and I'm pretty sure what's different in this situation is that look at the way they end this last episode, as you were talking about, Michael. My problem with the Civil War was that it ended with, this, big hunky dory, everybody's loving each other type approach at the end of Civil War, which of course we know Reconstruction occurs. And that is where the big critique from the Civil War historians was on Ken back in the 90s. This doesn't end like this. This ends with a discussion about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. They quote Hamilton. They quote the issue of a dictator, etc. And it sort of open-ends it. It ends with, and we know that what happens after that is that the amendments of the Constitution, the battles over the kind of stuff we're living through today as Americans, that's what the revolution resonates with. But go on, Aaron, what are you going to say?
Yeah, no, it'll be interesting to see how this programming gets licensed into the education space, because typically that's where you really make some of your money back, and especially the K to 12. So when I was on a school board, I mean, we had a lot of these. I mean, you wind up having it's a basically it's a PBS license, and then teachers and sort of heads of curriculum for different age cohorts and grade cohorts kind of pick pieces when they kind of interstitially put together the multimedia now, because that's just for decades really that's modern education, right? I mean, it's not just kid read book, that world is sort of over, whether you like it or not. That's just it's just reality. And so it'd be interesting to see what the uptick is, how many school districts measure like in the thousands, obviously, wind up actually licensing, and because I think that's going to be a real interesting test for sort of PBS going forward, right? They've always sort of struggled with this, with being, let's say, just more commercial and not hyper commercial, but commercial enough where they can really do the programming that they want to do. And if you're going to do these kind of series, these things take a hell of a lot of money and a long time. They're you're not putting this together for $1 million or $500,000 or anything, right? These are millions of dollars.
$30 million for this.
Yeah, $30 million bucks.
Who said 30 million?
Well, that's they themselves.
Is that Zeke? Is that right?
Zeke, is that accurate? It's $30 million.
I would have to go check.
No,
Yeah.
well, I'm pretty sure it
I
is.
think they spent less or more.
No. But the issue that Eric raises is an interesting one, because the licensing. Look at the politics of what's going on right now. PBS is knocked out, NPR is knocked out, CPB is knocked out. Now that doesn't mean that it can come back. It can't come back, but it's going to be interesting. But remember how
they're not knocked out. I mean, they still exist.
No.
I mean,
But they were defunded.
Not,
they were defunded by Congress.
Sure, but
they have
that
no
funding is a
budget.
tiny percentage. It's a tiny percentage of their funding.
No,
Right,
but the problem is that the
Even
other issue.
PBS?
See, I know documentary filmmakers who resent Ken Burns. And the reason they resent Ken Burns is they sort of feel that he dominates and squeezes out all the money that could be going to documentary films. I know people who've been complaining about that for years. And that gets into the whole attitude we have about funding documentary films in general. Because, and alternative points of view, because I don't have to tell you guys, like I go back to when the Congress was going nuts over the NEA funding the Andres Serrano film, when D'Amato goes bananas in the Senate about, oh my God, they're doing this film about Andres Serrano. They're doing films about gay people.
Well, who was the NEA head? What was that horrible one? Lynn.
Well, no, that was the NEH. That was Lynn Cheney when she was in charge of NEH. Lynn Cheney was in charge. She was in charge of NEH. But then Lynn Cheney.
That was in the book example. But let's cut everything that's a little bit lefty.
Well, she actually. Yeah, but they then started to go after NEA, NEH. They started to make a political football about it. They've been arguing about
So
POV.
stupid.
They've been attacking documentaries that the PBS has sponsored, the CPB has sponsored. This is a, a well-known issue, and look at Pacifica. I mean, we've been fighting with CPB for years to get money.
Well, the
We-
PBS thing that Sarah works for to address, sorry to interrupt, what Aaron was saying vis-a-vis the use of the materials they produce in a classroom setting. Sarah, according to that thing, the announcement that I edited for you, Jim, it says, Botstein works closely with PBS Learning Media and WETA-TV to develop educational content for programming.
Right.
As part of the Ken Burns classroom, I guess they have some kind of arm that attempts
they do.
to
Yeah,
use stuff
WETA,
educationally, Aaron.
WETA and WGBH up in Boston. WETA is the public television station in DC area. They're pretty hooked up, but they've all been clobbered by this defunding issue. I mean, it's not like, I don't agree with you, Aaron. I think that, that it is a serious issue.
So my point is the media landscape has changed fundamentally. People are not using terrestrial TV.
You're right.
People are not using terrestrial TV antennas. Right. And the idea you're going to be building all this content focused on that means, your audience is going to be pretty irrelevant in terms of size and scope relative to investment. And so they've resisted in essence, consolidation and modernization, right? Because you don't need all of these hundreds of PBS stations out there, all with their own little, sort of Subway franchise sandwich shop, because the modern landscape has just transformed itself. And the technology has transformed it, where you can have much more digital focus broadcasting. And because if your goal is to get a new generation of people actually viewing the content, you're not going to get to them through terrestrial broadcasts because they don't use terrestrial broadcasts, right? They use phones and they use their computers. That's just fact. And so when we say, the government cut 15%, or it's 15% of their budget, the problem isn't that 15% of the budget. The problem is that they have a business model that is still focused on a world that doesn't consume media the same way, and they really struggle, or I would argue don't even have a strategy when it comes to that.
They have a strategy. It's to get money out of people like you and me who are past a certain age. Maybe not you, but
but that's not a strategy. It is
because they want those goddamn donations. Because they're desperate now. They're desperate. That's how they get it.
But wait. Look. Remember, I've been a director.
For their whole thing.
I've been a director of a nonprofit. Look, I've been a director of a media nonprofit, so I used to have to deal with this bullshit all the time. And and you're right, Aaron. They don't. I think that's a fair criticism about terrestrial television and also other forms that they have not. Oh, Zeke left us. Okay, too bad. That basically actually, he's from one of the most powerful PR agencies in the country. These guys handle all of PBS's documentaries.
Sure.
But I do agree that they have not made the transition into social and digital forms of technology.
And it's 2025, which means your business is done.
Yeah. No. You're right. Because
what does it mean, though? I mean, they produce a thing. It certainly has links all over the place. So, are you saying that Zeke fellow wasn't promoting it enough online?
No. I'm sure.
How would he promote it?
They look, Gail, he got on Joe Rogan's show. I mean, that gets 50
so that's pretty
people.
good.
Yeah, hell yeah. I mean, they went.
I guess I don't know. I guess
but no. But here's the point.
It's a different audience.
We're talking more about production. Guys. We're talking more about. I'm talking about production, Frank.
Okay. Here's the bottom line.
Yeah.
It's one thing to go onto these social channels and promote something, but if you don't distribute through those channels and you still distribute through carriage, right, through the carriage system, which is what the legacy PBS is, that means when people see something, they're on Joe Rogan and there's tens of millions of people, listening on Spotify or whatever. And in the show, when they can't provide a link to YouTube or can't provide a link to something you could consume, but you're providing a link, you have to sign up for PBS, patch for $5 a month, and it's on and on. People just are all that friction.
They don't care, right?
Well, it's not even they don't care. They're too busy.
They don't even. They're not interested. They don't get it. That they're missing.
It's not even don't get it. I mean, that's all judgment. You're doing all judgment.
I'm saying. I'm in education. I know.
I understand that, but if it's all judgment, then burn everybody down and let's all take cyanide, right? Like at the end of the day, if the goal is to actually meet really people where they are, but if you either meet people where they are or you don't.
So how do you do it? How do you do it?
Hold on. Let me finish. Right? Okay. I mean, before you rip it apart, let me finish. So the point is that if you're going to leverage all of this new media to promote, then you're going to have a new distribution model. And the new distribution model is going to have to be some new way of distributing independent of traditional PBS, or PBS is going to have to choose to be part of this new distribution model, right? That PBS world is going to have to, in some ways, re-engineer itself so that when you go to PBS, you go to the PBS channel on YouTube, you go to the PBS channel on
they have
TikTok.
Channels, though.
No. Having a channel, like you can have a channel, I can have a channel. That's not having a channel, right? When you really look at having a channel, right, it's a distribution medium, right? It's pulling millions, tens of millions of viewers, because you're producing content that's keeping people there, right? It's creating a stickiness, right? And they don't have a stickiness at all in any of their new media, and their old media, to be blunt, is kids and old people. That's it, right? That's the only people who observe that, and maybe a small group of history nerds that are in between those two populations. Like, it's basically, once someone hits 10 years old, 12 years old, they stop using PBS, and once they get to, let's say, 50s and 60s. Of course it's true.
Why do you say that? For this
that's
kind
the
of
data.
Thing.
That's
this
the evidence.
That's
the evidence.
All right. Listen.
That's the evidence.
All right. Look, the evidence. Well, the
they
evidence
don't promote
is
education in high school.
All right. Well, this is interesting. Look. They're terrestrial and analog channels that have not engaged critically and creatively with these new forms for the past 30 to 40 years. Now, I would say that there are many PBS stations that have. WNYC Radio has. They actually had $10 million given to them by CPB to be sort of the headliner for how to deal with all this kind of TikTok and all these other kinds of innovations. I know Pacifica, forget about it. They're like back in the Stone Age. And I think that it's interesting that you say that, Aaron, because I do come across the YouTube channels of different NPR, different PBS stations, etc. But the question of how they handle the fact that people can create their own media and they don't need to depend on community radio or public media or anything like that. They can just do their own thing these days. And that's been increasingly so for the past couple of decades. And I don't, it's an interesting problem because now we have this retraction of federal funding across the board for political reasons. People shouldn't be surprised about this. Richard Nixon was going to do the same thing if he had been able to survive after of 1972. He was going to knock out all the funding for NPR, PBS, and CPB. It just is they took them, since 1973, it took them a long time to succeed to do this. So what we're dealing with right now is, what you're talking about to me is an interesting, unexplored issue, because we haven't had people really put a lot of energy and resources into it in the public media sphere, although they all talk about it. Trust me, I go to these conferences. These guys talk about and complain about it all the time. But in terms of dealing with it creatively, I know Pacifica is not really that. They're backwards on it. They just have not had the money to invest. So, and now it becomes worse because you have money that would normally you'd need for, you could put money aside for doing R&D, for example. I mean, you don't have that money now. You have to get money that you raise to go to basically operating costs, because that's where you get, the money that's taken away from the feds, which, what, $1 billion was taken away from PBS. That's a lot of money for all those different stations. But anyway, we can argue about this another time. I'm just curious, Sandy or Amy or Joan, do you have anything you want to add to this? Sandy, you've been very quiet.
I've been watching the series. I just finished episode 3. It's fabulous.
Okay.
The only thing I would say is the past few years to reintroduce or introduce to many, particularly I have a lot of friends that are now living in the United States, the easiest thing to get some take on what happened at that time period in the American Revolution is to go to the Morris Jamal Mansion and go on a docent tour. It
Right.
is something that's where George Washington planned the invasion, how he's going to retake Manhattan. It is a fascinating tour. And eventually what would happen with Aaron Burr, who would marry the widow, and the future and the descendants, and where it is today. What is remarkable during the summer, which I go to, they have jazz concerts there, and they integrate the past music into present day jazz and blues. And it's fun and informative. So that's how I do it with people, because they really don't know about the American Revolution, which was brought up earlier. I thought about a few questions, but as the Mike and everybody came on, you took my questions, so I remained silent. This was great. Thank you.
I apologize.
Well, yeah,
No,
well, I'm glad at least you watched some of the episodes.
Oh.
Last time you hadn't watched shit, so I'm glad at least you watched some of it today, Michael.
Oh, no, last time, no. I watched the episode because they were coming on. For you, I would do nothing. You know that.
Well, you do talk
I
enough
always
every
watch
time
it.
he gives you the opportunity, Michael. So don't
No,
bullshit us.
I'm glad you watched some of the episodes, because I was very conscious of that. I wanted to make sure you watched the goddamn thing.
By the way, if I can, just for Aaron's sake, and this is not probably what you're talking about, but if you go to Google Play, there's a download for the American Revolution with the PBS.
Right.
PBS. I mean, with all the shows, for what that's
No,
worth.
no, I'm not arguing they don't exist. My point is
But
that
something.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point.
I mean,
that-
I put the data in there where
no, it's a
you can see that it's still basically targeted at non-internet households and at terrestrial TV customers. And that's just not the world of 2025, right? I mean, you have to be a very uniquely disconnected individual in modern American life in 2025 to not have a smartphone, not have an internet connected TV and an internet connected laptop. I mean, that's a small user base, and they are in a lot of ways not geared for that population. And you see that in the fact that children's TV does so well because children's content is so controlled between schools and parents. But once kids reach a certain age, that shifts, where the kids have more autonomy and agency, and they go into a different world, and PBS doesn't track with them, and then some of them randomly come back when they're older and have kids. But
the hell's that?
What's that, Michael? You're blowing your nose?
no, it sounds like something. I don't know what it is, like a horn, like a ship's horn.
Michael was blowing
But
his nose.
no, it's not like a ship's horn. But anyways, but the point is that what happens is that population doesn't track back until they have kids.
Right.
And then they bring kind of the PBS Kids stuff back in, and that's it. And then a tiny number of people will watch NewsHour or watch a few other shows, Firing Line, whatever. I mean, it's and that's that. And so if they don't radically expand their approach to media and become modern, they're going to be basically just in some weird form of government dependency, which just doesn't have the support because there's so many other media options anyways.
Well, that okay.
Um,
Okay. This is something I don't want. We could spend an hour and a half fighting about
yeah,
this,
of course.
Well,
and we can do it another time because I have
Yeah.
a lot of opinions about this. But Sandy, one thing's interesting about the Jamel Mansion is that they make a big deal about where Lynn Miranda actually composed Hamilton up there. And I
No.
personally, I think Lynn Miranda is extremely creative. As I say, I can't stand Hamilton personally as a historical
how
figure.
many times have you seen the play, if ever, though, Jim?
I've
I mean,
seen
I did.
I saw it on
I did.
TV, okay? I saw it on
Yeah.
TV. I did not the first time I ever had to deal with I had to deal with Hamilton reenactors. And then all of a sudden I'm confronted with all these guys dressed in Revolutionary War uniforms singing out all the Hamilton stuff. I said, "What the hell is this?" I was actually with what's his name? I was with um the manager of WBA Radio. I was with Berthold. We were at an event, and all of a sudden, these guys come out dressed in colonial costumes, singing this song. I said, "What the fuck is this shit?" It sort of blew my mind in a way. But
Well,
anyway,
Well, let me
I saw,
just say,
hold on to this. Public Theater, the second performance.
oh, you did?
And
Oh, wow,
only,
Sandy!
oh yeah,
Wow,
I
good for
knew it.
you.
I knew it. It
Good
was
for you.
sold out so many months before, but I
Wow.
told her, my friend, both of us were members, going, this is going to be a hit. I can feel it. So the second performance, $40. Can't beat that. And I
Right?
said,
Yeah.
this
Wow.
is going to
Those
Broadway.
days are gone. You know, I wanted to see Joan or Amy. Joan or Amy, do you have anything you want to say about this before we go?
Amy has opinions, I bet.
Yeah, Amy. I know. Yeah,
Come on,
Can you
Amy.
hear
What
me?
about the visuals of the show?
Amy,
Amy's
what'd you
another
think?
art historian.
Amy.
Yeah, yeah, I'm coming. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yes.
we got you.
Yes? No?
We
Yes.
hear you.
I don't know. I couldn't figure out how to put my hand up, basically.
Oh,
Oh,
But what I was going to say, I mean, what I
that's an
wanted to ask
example
them
of what Aaron was talking about. Go
That's
on.
right. We're all Luddites.
Go on.
Anyways, what I wanted to ask them was, I really enjoyed the inclusion of the Indians in that story. I mean, that obviously has been spoken about, but I was also curious about they didn't look into it's always focused on the patriots and never about the dilemma that the loyalists had and what that thinking was. And, there was
It's
that
in
whole
there,
side.
though.
They do a lot of that.
It's in there.
yeah,
I
there
didn't.
was stuff in there
Oh, yeah.
There
about,
was stuff about them, but it was all sort of, I don't know. I didn't think it was as.
Have you watched the whole
um,
thing? Have you watched?
I
Amy?
watched the whole thing. Yeah.
Oh, all right, all right.
Maybe
Well,
I fell asleep sometime.
oh, that's probably when you fell asleep.
No, I just remember. I mean, I remember as a child living outside Boston, and everybody was rah rah about the sons and daughters of the American Revolution and all that. And I went home. I knew my family had been there. It came over early, and my mother said no, they were loyalists. And I remember just that there's
wow.
always been.
Well, that's interesting,
So
Amy.
we found out later that there were some that were patriots too as well, but they had gone up to Nova Scotia and Maine. They were
Oh,
all
wow,
there.
wow. Well, they mentioned that at towards the end. I mean, it's the whole
Yeah.
loyalism stuff is throughout the entire
I
series.
know, but it's just I didn't think it was addressed as sort
I
of.
thought it was pretty good, but I don't know.
Yeah,
what-
no, well, that's okay.
I
Well,
don't know. Maybe I should. I'll watch it again.
yeah, but you should ask. Yeah, well, it would be interesting if you'd asked them that question. They probably would have said, "What?" But anyway, it would have been interesting to watch them react to that one.
Are there a lot of diaries by loyalists or
Oh,
letters?
hell yeah.
There must
There's
be
tons
tons of
Must be.
letters.
There must be.
Tons of stuff.
and
Uh,
also the fact that African American and First Nations people were not really, in other words, they had every reason to be loyal to the British side and the loyalist side.
Made that clear.
The loyalist
Yeah, they
was-
made that very clear in the whole
There's
thing.
that book that Simon Sharma did about that, and then how
Right,
they
right.
and they were afterwards they thought they would get their freedom, but they didn't. They got shoved back into slavery. Most of them, or a lot of them.
Well, the funny thing is,
Barbados.
I remember when I started to read the Journal of Negro History in the 60s, and the Journal of Negro History had articles about this stuff up the wazoo. And it's interesting. I listened to Jeffrey Ward. Jeffrey Ward used to be the editor of American Heritage. And I recall when I started to read American Heritage, which is, I guess, the late 50s, every single issue had something on the Revolutionary War. And what Ward said was that was a policy of American heritage. They sort of looked on it as a staple to put in every issue something that had to do with the American Revolution, which sort of said, okay, that was interesting because they sort of knew their audience. And there's another guy who I knew worked for American Heritage. He set up another magazine years later. But, look, Jeffrey Ward is possibly somebody to interview when he does his book. I could sort of ask the people there. Now, I didn't bring Burns on because Burns will basically sit there and filibuster the whole damn thing. And it was probably better to bring Schmidt and Sarah on because they're a little less willing to be aggressive and vigorous as Ken is. Because Ken will just sit there and go on for 10 minutes, and you can't shut him up.
Well,
really thought they
he's
were
also
an interesting.
selling his product. Yeah, he's been doing that for years, and you know that, Jim.
Yeah. But
I wanted to ask, what did he do? I mean, he obviously has some key to funding at PBS, but how much is it his structure? I mean, he invented the structure, I guess you could say, but the format.
Gail, that's a good question. That would have been.
I was going to ask them, but I forgot. And maybe they don't want to talk about that because it's probably their boss, right?
Well, yeah, he is their boss.
Yeah, so maybe that's out of school anyway.
Well, somebody's going to be in command. Okay, so basically that's it.
Well, that's a military term.
No, but I would say that at this point, they're talking about a collegial kind of editing process. I mean, if they have these joint meetings with Ken Burns, they bring on Atkinson was talking about how he basically helped the script for 4 years. And Jeffrey Ward is always brought in because he's helping to write the narrative with a whole bunch of them. So it must be an interesting creative process because they're sitting there. They also have Buddy Squires, who's their cinematographer. So
what did he do? Do you know? That's what I wanted to ask them. What did he do? Did he just film some of that stuff? Because it's crazy, the filming.
Well,
some of it. The aerial shot of the reenactors going up the road.
Probably.
That's a knockout visually.
Yeah,
I think.
Probably. He's probably involved in the process of selecting.
They did it with a drone, I guess.
Yeah. No, they made a big deal about the fact that they normally don't depend on reenactors when they do movies, and this time they sort of did. But they it's interesting the way they use the reenactors. They were not necessarily coming on screen and talking. They were just simply as B-roll to some extent.
They were visual. They were visuals, or as we would say in the film industry, they were upgraded extras. So it was. Yeah.
But the sleeves and the uniforms, very rarely the whole shebang of them pretending they were doing a battle. And they had all these, sort of diagonally placed, sort of up, vaguely close-up views of their sleeves and that kind of thing, which is, I mean, what are they going to do? They're not going to go out and pay for uniforms to be produced the way you would in a high budget Hollywood film. So I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, no, the uniforms. Well, the uniforms. There's a reason why I asked her the question about American Revolution reenactors, is these guys tend to spend a lot more money on their uniforms than Civil War reenactors, because Civil War reenactors can go buy. They have companies that just mass produce this stuff,
like Halloween costumes.
Well, yeah, it's like but Revolutionary War reenactors, it's about $1,500 to $2,000 to really do a job, and so it's not exactly a sport for the non-affluent. And
I love the point they made about a different shade of red used by British officers. I'm sure that's true because the dyes were very expensive, right?
Right. Yeah, they became better targets. They had more fancy uniforms.
But I didn't really get that out of the photography. I couldn't make that distinction with the reenactors. Maybe they're not that keyed into that.
Well, they also used various they had a professional watercolor painter.
That's the lady in Brooklyn, I think.
Well,
is that what they were talking about?
I don't know who that was. That was the person doing maps. But anyway,
it looked a little Saturday Evening Post at some point. I
Well,
thought.
in any case, I'm going to get off. But first of all, Jim, I had to say one point. You got to give Hamilton points because he was anti-racist, or at least an abolitionist, anti-slavery. So you got to give him points for that. But
Oh no, boy, Hamilton's a fascinating guy. I just don't like. I didn't agree with what he wrote in the Federalist Papers. That's all. Anyway,
right. But I want you to, if you could tell them that at least speaking for myself, but I think I'm speaking for most people here, is that we really appreciate they're doing this and they're taking the time out because they're probably running around like chickens without heads trying to get this thing out here.
well, Zeke is the guy. Zeke, the 24-year-old PR guy, is the guy who, he came on. He wanted to listen. I was surprised, but that's all right. I don't care. It's fine that he came. He's just trying to learn. And, as I say, Dan Flores, they were very nice to me whenever I've covered their films. And they're going to probably use this series as a basis of a class. I suggested this to a friend of mine up at Harvard to do this. I said, hey, man, check it out, man. You got to look at this. It's a great way to teach a class, just using these using these films, and then you can sit there and critique it all you want. But
right. They can teach, like you said, it's a starting point. But I did want to say, get the message to them that it was much appreciated, and I thought they did a sterling job. Also, if there was a way of contacting them, possibly, or because they were like, for instance, or getting the possibility of contacting a couple of the historians, like Maggie Blackhawk.
That's easy, Mike. You just go to the AHA.
Michael, all those, I know a couple of these guys personally, and I intend to do stuff with them. I've already asked them to do stuff with them. So that's going to happen. Yeah, go on, Sandy. Oh, you're going to cut out? Okay, nice seeing you, Sandy. Yeah, I'm going to ask some of them to participate. I've already asked them. So, for example, Gail went to hear Christopher Brown talk. And Christopher I know personally. I asked him a couple of months ago, I said, Chris, when, this comes out, he said, sure, Jim. And so I just want to figure out strategically how to do it with Christopher. And Michael Whitkin, I've asked Michael, I said, last time I saw Michael was last Thursday. I say, hey, man, have you started to get fan mail from around the country, Mike? And he goes, well, everybody's relatives have. Michael didn't like all the military history stuff, but then Michael's father was a SEAL, a Navy SEAL. He's Native American. He's Ojibwe. So Michael said, I didn't like all the military history stuff. I said, well, different strokes, Michael. Different strokes.
Why did he say
well,
that?
whatever. I mean, he's a social and political historian. He's not a military historian. So,
but they had so much of what you watch. Some idiot in the government is going to call these films, whatever you.
Politically correct. Well, they're already starting that.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
They already started that.
That is going to be the great critique.
They already started that, and that's why I made the comment when I talked about Conestoga. I said that was ridiculous because they didn't make a big deal. The National Review focused in on the first 10 minutes of the movie. All they concentrated on was the fact that they quote Conestoga. Now, Conestoga is a chief. I forget where he's from. He's a Mohawk. He's one of the Six Nations from the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. But he makes his comment in 1744, and the whole issue is that they say, oh my God, they're talking about how the Iroquois basically are the major influence on the Constitution. Well, they sort of put the idea out that here's this guy saying this. They're not saying that it's the major influence on the Constitution. No. But that's how they interpret it, and then they proceed to dismiss it from then, which is ridiculous. And
there you have it. It's ignorance rules.
Well, it's not ignorance rules. It's
it is. It's what they learned in 6th grade, and they don't want to go beyond it.
No. It's the fact that they have their own ideological predilection to how they understand the American Revolution.
You're
And
saying what I just said in a
well,
dumb
yeah, but
way, but
all
you're
right.
saying it better.
Well, I'm trying to be a little less nasty about it, but
Well,
in
the
any
thing
case,
that I think that what Aaron said, I mean, whatever his points about the tech part of it, any of us, Amy knows this, when you teach in universities, I mean, I haven't taught in a while, but even the last 30 years that I was teaching, universities all over the country, ones you've heard of, every single colleague I had would say you have to have sitcom timing or you lose the undergrads. You lose their attention. So you got to switch, have a joke every 5 to 8 minutes or every 20 minutes or whatever. I mean, it's a problem keeping people's attention. And everything you do has to be structured that way. And whether or not people like it, mentioning the Indians or the Native Americans does get people's attention because they're not used to hearing that stuff unless they're in school right now.
Yeah, but I'll tell you one thing that's interesting is that class that's being taught at Yale, 450 students are taking a class. They took a class that ends this week at Yale on the meaning of the American Revolution. And they had so many people subscribe to the class, they had to turn them away. They had 14 TAs in the class, and a friend of mine sent me the link to it. A friend of mine at Yale sent me the link to it, and it's like, hey, I mean, it just shows you that there is, and it's a very sophisticated syllabus. I mean, at some point I'll share it, but it's a very sophisticated syllabus. But it sort of has Joanne Freeman, who teaches American Revolution up at Yale, Beverly Savage, who I know from Columbia, and then it has David Blight. I've been friends with David Blight for many years, and David is doing the middle part of it. But it talks about the impact of the American Revolution on American society, and it's one of these, and it had I was sort of mind blown. 450 people signed up for the class.
It's not so much, Jim. I've taught.
Yeah, but it shows me that people that what I find interesting about this the right wing has started to attack this documentary. Okay, they started, and they're going to probably accelerate. But then what I think I wouldn't ask them in an open session, but the way they handled the battles is a way to negate the right wing, because they really went into detail about the actual battles. And it was a war, actually. As one friend of mine said yesterday, well, Jim, it's a war. And I said, yeah, I understand that. But some people, have a different attitude about portraying that. But they sort of did that in a way, I think, consciously to shut those guys up. The whole Second Amendment crowd. The fact that the guys that take great, oh, well, my ancestors fought here and fought there. I mean, there's lots of people like that. And I think that's a conscious decision to sort of handle that criticism, because it was indeed an amazing, dramatic story. But anyway, Aaron, do you got any last comments to make?
No, it's a great form that you did today. I really appreciate it. And, thank everyone for participating. It's really great. It's amazing.
Yeah. Well, all this I'm going to have to cut out of the public thing. But anyway, it was fun to talk about this. And yeah, Amy, it's great to hear your voice. I didn't know you grew up. Yeah, I didn't know you grew up around Boston.
Yeah, I grew up out west of Boston, and then my grandparents were, the whole family was from there, at least my mother's side, back to the 17th century.
Yeah.
Early.
Yeah, well, as I started off, I said, what got me was, I'll never forget my paternal grandfather, who had relatives who fought his relatives did not fight in the revolution. It was my maternal his wife had relatives who fought in the revolution, and my maternal grandmother, her relatives fought in the revolution, and they were sort of like, they were like poor white folk from Pennsylvania, as I sort of reconstructed. And the other side of the family were less that way. They're actually, and her name was Calvert. So they were sort of old waspy types. And they sat there, and this is 1954. I'll never forget it. They had this big fight. I'm a little kid, and I'm saying, why are they arguing? And my grandfather, who had volunteered to fight in the First World War, this is my maternal grandfather, he was an immigrant from Spain who had been sent back to Spain twice. And he laughed at them. And so did my grandfather, who'd been at Pearl Harbor. They laughed at them. They said, you know what, they're arguing about who's more American than the other person. And my two grandfathers smoked a cigarette and started laughing and took me away from them. And there was my introduction to the American Revolution. You know, people basically being wasped, you know, looking back on it as two people like, you know, clinging to wasp identity and they don't want to include anybody else in it as being an American, which I sort of find, you know, completely repulsive. But that's, you know, I reacted to that, I guess, ever since. It was to me just, you know, Jesus Christ, what kind of, you know, and then I got older and then I had to deal with my great aunt who ran the DAR in San Diego, and she was a trip. She said, oh, well, I helped get that great American elected into Congress in 1946. She was referring to Richard Nixon, of course. And I said, oh, my God.
Yeah, but did she leave a lot of letters? Because those letters must be nuts.
Well, they have letters. Yeah, they have letters about one relative who went around and went into the gold rush. You know, he went all the way around the Cape Horn and all, but all that kind of crap. And like you get exposed to all that stuff, that jingoistic shit as a kid, and like, you know, fuck that shit. I mean, like,
well,
you know,
I mean, the one thing I will say, Jim, I mean, having grown up out here in California, and you know, I'm out here for a month. I come out 2-3 times a year, and but I live in northern New Jersey. There is a different sense of what revolution means. So in the East Coast, because obviously those were the colonial states or the possessions, whereas in the West there really isn't this connection. It's much more ephemeral, right? It's sort of viewed as, you know, kind of old history, right? Like, you know, it's almost like talking about Dutch history,
right?
And I think that's a very different perspective, and you see that in sort of this discussion or this show. When I talk to other, you know, relatives and their kids and stuff, it's the revolution just doesn't have any, you know, tangible, you know, whereas living in New Jersey, my kids were exposed to, you know, I mean, every other street had some revolutionary connection in North Jersey, right outside of, you know, Fort Lee. So, you know, so there is a difference that's pretty substantial,
right?
You know, so one almost becomes just, you know, sort of legalistic, you know, cult, you know, kind of old history, and another one becomes something more tangible because it's more physical, right? I mean, no one does revolutionary. I mean, actually, there are a tiny number of people that do this, but no one's really doing revolutionary war reenactments in Nevada and Arizona and California, and that sounds silly, but that means that there just isn't a culture behind the revolution. And so when you guys all grew up out in the East Coast, you know, that was there, right? Whether you liked it, you didn't like it, you could critique it. I didn't really get that until I moved out there, right? Until
you moved to New Jersey.
Yeah, until I really moved to New Jersey. And of course, in New Jersey, it's just like you're soaked in it, right? Because you know, and as they you know, sort of built the, you know, the show around, you know, maybe a third of the show is basically around New Jersey. You could argue they could have done 2 episodes on New Jersey and the Revolution, and then 4 episodes on, you know, the Revolution. And so kind of swinging from Southern California to that is almost like it's 2 countries. And I would say even today, even more so, because when I was growing up, I had the kind of the original kind of Common Core, you know, classics, you know, in the 70s and 80s out here. So, you know, you did get at least, you know, what you might call more traditional East Coast type academic history. But today, that, you know, kids don't, you know, study that, right? I mean, they know there was a revolution in 1776, and they knew there was a civil war, and they knew, you know, if they know the War of 1812, I'd be shocked, you know, and things like that. So it's a much different connection.
Do you, Amy? Do you agree with that? Because you live in LA.
What I was just thinking is, when I was growing up, I lived in Weston, which is right, then there's Sudbury and there's Concord and Lexington and the whole bit.
How about
School
Stockbridge?
trips. I mean, you go out there on school trips every year,
Yep.
and you go there with your parents, or it's around you, and okay, this is, where the what's it, anyways, where the battles and where the Paul Revere rode through. Did he ride through here? Where did Washington stop? It was very much of a living history, and I don't think it's probably too much different now for children. But then you do sort of, so it's sort of ingrained.
So now you're in California. Do they talk about California pioneers? I had
yeah,
a
they do.
I don't live out here. So I don't live here. This is what I said earlier. I live in New Jersey, but I come out here 3 times a year for about a month each. And so I grew up out here. And so, yeah, I mean, the history we get out here is a combination of the indigenous history. You get the Nuevo Spain, and actually Nuevo Spain 1 and 2, and then Mexico. And then you get the Russian coast. So the Russians, and then you also get, all of the different sort of migration waves. So that tends to be your history
and the gold
out
rush.
here. Well, yeah, I mean, the gold rush is one of those, but I mean, it's one of, let's say, 10 components of sort of waves of people, going back to, and there's a pretty good, there's a pretty good breakdown difference between the indigenous, the Oregon and the Washington tribe confederacies and what you get in California, which was pretty radically different because you have all of Northern California as a barrier. So the Oregon and Washington Confederacy tribes, which were along the coast, never really, came south, and then all of the tribes that were to the east, which is, from the Columbia River, what became the Columbia River, those are different. So we get a good, I mean, we always got a pretty good breakdown of that.
This
I
is
would
in
say it's
public
pretty
school,
balanced.
right? This is in public school.
Yeah, of course.
Well, Amy, what about, your daughter teaches in private school, so what kind of stuff do they do there in California?
Well, she grew up out here too. She grew up, but she it's ancient history.
Yeah.
In fact, well, there was actually when I was younger, I lived in Texas for a few years as a child, and we studied Indians there. It seemed like every year there was a different Indian tribe or something. But and she had here it's a lot of exposure more to the 19th century and to the Indians and their experiences going, and also the Mexicans. I mean, obviously the Spanish and the Mexican and the missions, but the missions have all been sort of cleaned up, and they're very, and now with the attention to the mission schools, it's a lot different than attitude or approach to it. But I'm not making much sense. But there were other things in terms, I started to say before that one of the things I remember was that the cattle ranchers and all the skin from the hides were what made the Industrial Revolution possible. So there are different points they do.
Yeah,
I mean, one thing they do really well out here is they preserve.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second because I'm leaving. So I'll speak to you guys later.
Goodbye. Yeah, what were you going to say?
No, one thing they do out here really well, and some of it is just because of the environment. It just doesn't get as cold. It doesn't. You aren't getting, you aren't going through the sort of the thermostatic process, right? Where, like concrete's expanding and brick is expanding and collapsing every year. So they really do a good job in maintaining the Spanish missions, the indigenous hut systems.
Right.
I mean, they and that's been pretty active for a very long time. I mean, really, in some ways, going back to parts of the 19th century. So, yeah, it's like a different country. I mean, it's the only way to put it. I mean, people know they're in the United States here, but they also know they're in this other thing. It's almost like
Right,
when you go to
right,
Hawaii or
right,
Alaska, it's not quite that extreme, but it's a version like that.
right.
And then being soaked and having my kids soaked in New Jersey on it. And actually my oldest daughter lives in the Bay Area last, 4 years. So she's getting, like the California shock treatment version of it, which is just different for her, right? Because there's things her friends out here don't know. Like, I mean, these are things you guys would all be shocked about. Like, how don't people know this stuff? But it's like, well, you don't grow up in that East Coast, milieu that it's just like that's just not what you talk about, right?
Right.
And to be fair, like I had history of China and Asia and things like that in school that very few kids, unless you were some really special kid or special school in the East Coast, just had any knowledge of, right? So it's a little different, right? So we were not nowhere near as European oriented, obviously, in our history. We got enough to be, to be able to go to an East Coast college, kind of enough, but not like you guys would have. And so that's kind of what I caught up on going out there, right? So it's kind of weird. Like we didn't get the South much, we didn't get Europe much, and we didn't get a lot of that old American history. I mean, we got enough. We got a ton of kind of new America to the west, and then Asia and Mexico, a ton of Mexican history and stuff. And then out there, I got I kind of caught up in my mid late 20s and 30s or whatever. And so it is a little it's different, right? And I always encourage people on the East Coast, if they ever come out here, just step into one of the college seminars and stuff. They're always available. All the state schools are very open that way here, because we have so many. We have over 160 community colleges and 50 state
I remember
colleges.
when I first moved here from New York, I felt like I should change my money because it was so, I'd gone 6 hours and it was so far. But also when I was first teaching here, I remember looking at the class list. I was teaching at Cal State LA.
Yep.
And it was just, the names were so different. I was so used to European names.
Yep.
On the East Coast.
Well, I grew up.
And not only
yeah.
the Spanish and Chinese and Japanese, but a whole
Vietnamese,
slew.
Cambodians, everything. Yeah. So I was born and raised till fifth grade, about 4 miles from you in Boyle Heights, and then I moved to Pasadena, and then from there I went to high school there and stuff. So yeah, I know Cal State campus really well, actually.
Yeah.
So.
Well, so what's interesting about what you were exposed to, Aaron, is that it seems that the impact of the 60s in the secondary school curriculum is what you're reflecting in what you're saying to me, because 100%. I'm pretty sure that before the 60s hit, the kind of education that was in the secondary school system probably minimized talking about Asian Americans, probably minimized talking about Mexican Americans.
Yep, 100%.
Et cetera. And because I remember all those fights.
Yeah.
And so that,
no, that's
right.
a great point. That's a great point.
Well, now I think it's more that we learn European history. Now it's world history that they're exposed to. So it's not just focused on the origins of the American, civilization or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, it's a great point, because I'll tell you a great example of this is that, growing up, obviously, right outside of New York, or my kids, they got soaked in, we'll call it American Italian culture, all the good and bad that it is. But then when they go to Italy, it's, they enjoy it like a person from New Jersey. My kids are from New Jersey, right? I mean, even though they might live here or whatever, or visit, but I didn't grow up with that, because, up until recently, if you want the worst Italian food in America, you come to California, you go to Southern California. Northern San Francisco is really
That's
good Italian
true.
food.
Although New Jersey's a close second. Sorry, I go to Italy a lot.
No, New Jersey has phenomenal Italian food. I don't know what you're talking about. That's ridiculous.
Well, you're talking about Sicilian or Neapolitan food, I guess.
Okay, well, that's called Italy. I mean, unless you're just an Italian supremacist. Are you an Italian supremacist? Are you an Italian
you
supremacist?
want to argue about everything. I mean, come on.
No. I mean, you just want to.
You can hear my biography.
Aaron, she gets spoiled because she goes to Northern Italy all the time, so she gets exposed to Tuscan cooking all the time.
Okay, that's great. I love.
Well, it is great.
My daughter studied there
But
for a year,
anyway.
but there's other Italies,
No,
unless
well,
they
and you're
shouldn't
of
be part
course
of
right,
Italy.
Aaron. Aaron, it's not. It's a
It's
silly.
not an argument. It's
Yeah, it's a silly
different
discussion
food.
here.
It's
You'll
reflects
never,
the
you'll never
100%.
change you'll never change your mind about it.
Exactly.
It's the
Forget about
people
it.
who came here in the
But-
late 19th century who determined what passes for Italian food.
No, but you know what's interesting in listening to this?
But anyway,
I
so-
remember when I was a
Resort
kid in New York City in junior high school,
Yeah.
I had a whole year where
Yeah.
all we did in junior high school was study New York State history.
Yep, that's right.
Yeah.
Now I'm sure that has disappeared completely from the curriculum.
I think that's true, though. It's the regional thing. I mean, out here they
Yep.
study California history. And,
That's right.
you know,
So what I took in school in starting in 6th grade, so they have a thing called Gates here. It's like it's a public school kind of gifted tracks that kids can go on. But it's a really great system because you take these tests every year, and across all these different subjects, if you pass a Gates level, you're allowed to just take another level, no matter where you are in any other subject. So if you're really into science, but maybe your math isn't quite as great, you could take an 8th grade science class in 6th grade. I mean, it's a great, phenomenal system because it really lets kids grow the way they who they are. But anyway, so in 6th grade, we took history of the West, 7th grade, history of California, 8th grade, history of Southern California. And then after that, if you wanted, in high school, you take an elective, and I took, like history of LA, which of course we watched totally inappropriately, but it was fun. We watched Chinatown in like 9th grade, and it was a blast. And we actually went on field trips, and we went to the water aqueducts and all that kind of stuff. And you really got to see your regional history. And the kids, they took 2 of those classes away. So the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade ones were mandatory. So there's a whole generation or 2 of kids that grew up that, kind of my age cohort, mid 50s. So, basically late 40s to early 60s. And we kind of know each other because we can bring up stuff from movies to things that happen here. And we know these things. People older, unless they're really into the history, or people younger have just no idea. Right. Like, we'll just like crack the joke Chinatown, and we all laugh. And then everyone else like, why are you talking about Chinatown? I'm like, forget about it. There's no point, and that's the kind of history you're taught here, which I guess is similar to what you were taught at Jim. And the thing I was going to make about Italian, I was going to say, people here are really fascinated by Europe, France, Italy, etc., because it's just so far, right? I mean, you're taking
but in California they're
12-hour
fascinated too. California, look, Northern California, and I've never lived in Southern California, so
Yeah.
I don't pretend. Amy
Yep.
and Aaron, you guys lived in, and so did Gail lived in LA.
Well, me too.
But-
I lived there. I
know,
taught at Riverside, Aaron.
but I always found people I always found people interested in Europe and Northern California.
No. Of
I
course,
mean-
in the Bay Area, it's very different because
But
different.
you know what different? What's different is that in 30 or 40 years ago, let's say in the 70s, more people were interested in Asia,
Yep.
in Japan and China, and going to all throughout, but particularly China, in the as a general phenomena in the Bay Area.
Yeah, in the Bay Area, sure.
And the first time I ever met a quarterback who was Chinese American, I never met a guy who was a quarterback who was a Chinese American, and that sort of blew my mind completely.
I had one that was half Chinese, half black on mine.
I'll never forget. I met a guy who was a quarterback in his high school in California, and I looked at him. I said to him, "Don't take it wrong, man. I've never met a Chinese American who was a quarterback before. I mean, sort of blows my mind." And he says, "What is it?" Well, he got a little defensive at first. I said, "No, I don't mean that defensively. I mean, back in the East Coast, all the guys I knew they weren't interested in playing high school sports. They were interested in, getting into good colleges." So
I would say this. So we have a difference out here that because we have huge populations, we get a much more normal American Bell distribution of people, whereas when you get more selective populations, those people tend to be more elite. So growing up where I grew up, we had a pretty large Korean population, pretty decent growing size Vietnamese population, And these were just regular people, like you would have regular people anywhere else.
You're talking
and those
about
kids,
Pasadena? Where'd you grow up?
Pasadena, South Pasadena, LA,
Pasadena has
Monterey
its
Park.
old families.
Yeah, that's a tiny percentage of Pasadena,
Yeah, true.
right? Like,
But it
so
has
I
a
went
different
to.
feel. Like Pasadena people are proud to not be Los Angeles.
Yeah,
They have a whole
absolutely. I
other
mean, growing up there, I mean, I'm well aware of it. I went to John Muir High School. I mean, like that's my identity, and I went to Pasadena City College as part of it. So it's so my point is that you got a much larger population. So on my high school, high school sports, high school anything, we had everyone you could imagine, playing all the sports because they were just regular. They were just regular people, regular kids, right? It wasn't this sort of elite tigering. I mean, there was that subpopulation doing that, but that was different, right?
Wait, you were in high school before. What's that proposition that defunded the public schools?
No.
Proposition 10?
Prop 13 in 1978.
Yeah.
No, I was in high school in from 83 to 87. So
you were affected by that.
We were partially affected. It became much more affected kind of by the late 80s and early 90s when you had to go through your capital campaigns again for rebuilding, right? So that's where Prop 13 Prop 13 didn't hit your operating budgets. It hit your capital side of your school budgets over time. So the schools were fine unless they were really old schools, but in most California schools weren't.
Yeah, but didn't
that
raise
old.
The tuitions of the public schools? I mean, Amy and Gail, you remember? Because
no. I remember
going to Cal.
Jim,
go on.
Jim, you're confusing two things. Prop 13 affected
elementary
property taxes,
schools.
Which is K to 12, just like we have a property tax system everywhere else. Higher ed has always been a budget.
Wasn't the lottery supposed to fuel the public education?
Well, no, not
a big joke.
I mean, it's not that. No, that's a broad statement, right? That's like saying tariffs can get rid of income taxes, right? It's
no, but they said it was supposed to be for when they lottery.
And it did help, but you're never going to replace property taxes, right? So when you have property tax leveling, which is what they had here, and by the way, there's a very practical reason you had Prop 13, which was you had inflation that exploded from 1968 through basically 1981, 82. And you had older people literally losing their houses because their property taxes were going up 3, 4, 5-fold in the 1970s, and they were on fixed incomes. And so, we want to pretend like, oh, well, okay, old person, just die, right? Like that's not really a strategy that's going to work in a large state. So people revolted against it, and they didn't have a solution, right? They didn't, like today you do indexing, today you do tax rebates. They just didn't have the tools, like New Jersey suffers from a very similar dynamic, especially with inflation in the last, 5-6 years going up about 25% or so, where, we're basically doing an indexing and like a fake version of Prop 13 for people who are on fixed incomes over 65, 70, because you don't want them losing their houses, obviously, because they can't pay their property taxes. So that was a real.
I wonder how many houses have not been sold since the late 70s in California. Most of them happen. With each sale, the property tax goes up.
It gets reset. So what really happened is you had a huge delay of houses getting sold until the 2000s, and then obviously just the wave of millions of people coming here. People just were incentivized at a certain point to sell the house and trade down or move or whatever, and people passed away too, obviously. So Prop 13 medium long term affected the schools dramatically because you wound up having a lot of physically older schools, and so the fight for 30 years now is the capital campaigns, and that's a real problem in K-12 school because of because of reapportionment, right? It gets really hard in complex big school systems. Like, where do you put the money to rebuild what school based on where populations are moving to, right? Like that's this, it's like an amoeba, and so California really struggled. I mean, it really struggles. Now we brought Prop 13 back for commercial property. So we got rid of it, most of it, for commercial property. But the worst thing that happened is the inflation the last 5 years, 6 years. It reset it all over again. People do not want to pay 50% more in property taxes in 5-6 years. That's just overwhelming to people. And that's a rational response, right? If you got a bill every year in your condo or your co-op in the city, a 10% more HOA, there's some point you're going to be like, I don't care what this is for. I can't afford it. And that's a similar dynamic that's going on out here. So it's a struggle. Until California changes Prop 13, you're never going to change a K-12 system. It's impossible.
Well, the thing that always amazed me with California is when I first went out to California in the 60s, I was amazed at the public school system in California. It was
yeah, it's
so
great.
much. It was, first of all, it was well funded. Even with Reagan as governor, it was
Absolutely.
well funded. The athletic programs were just way beyond anything I experienced in New York City,
I got the same thing.
because you had space, you had football. I mean, I love to play football. It had all these things that I sort of envied tremendously that people had, and it also had enough funding to really make it. I would say that the secondary school system in California I personally think, was probably one of the best in the country at that time in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And then of course it really killed me when this defunding of it started. And then when friends of mine at that point, I think, to go to Cal, someone can correct me, I believe that Cal was either free or little to no money at that time.
It was free.
Yeah, a little. I mean, it was, and yet Cal was as good as any Ivy League school in the United States. As far, I mean, it was a tremendous institution. And what always amazed me with the Bay Area was how Stanford and Cal would collaborate. Which
absolutely.
And what got me was when I was taking care of my mother when she was dying, I was able to. What they would do, which I thought was when I consider how the institutions in New York City operated, with such a sharp contrast. In order to get national defense funding for regional centers, for example, African studies, what happened was that the Stanford Center in African Studies and the UC Berkeley Center for African Studies would collaborate so they could jointly share the money. That kind of bullshit did not happen in the Northeast of New York City. And so, for example, Columbia used to get a lot. They used to get $1 million a year for African studies, and they lost that money, and no one bothered because they were so, they were so stuck up in their. Frankly, that's part of what was going on. They were so stuck up in their attitudes. They wouldn't cooperate with Rutgers, Princeton, or Columbia, which they could have done. And they could have shared the money jointly together, which was, to me, completely fucked up.
I'll give you an example of
millions and millions of dollars. But the Bay Area was so much. It was just really marvelous.
And that's at like a high level, but at a smaller level. So in California, we have a thing called dual enrollment. So that gate system I was telling you about. So by the time you get to 9th and 10th grade, if you are able to do on college work, you have two choices. You could take AP classes, or you could dual enroll in your local community college, which is what I did. And then I finished with an associate's degree in high school. So I had 2 years of college already done. And then you're just going straight into your third year. You're just applying to schools as basically a rising junior. And so we had in Pasadena, because there's some, bunch of cool stuff like Norton Simon Museum of Art and the Huntington Library. And, we have a whole bunch of stuff like that in Pasadena, City College and Caltech. And they really integrate into the school systems, into the K-12 systems. And that's just normal. And I remember, when my kids started, going to school, I mean, luckily they were a really nice charter school that kind of did that. It was really a big reason moved to where we did. But I saw the places and it was just, there's almost an old world, inability to collaborate or look at a lot of things in almost zero-sum ways. And that's one thing that I think is a huge advantage out here, is that there is a pretty continuous culture. And I think some of it is just the scale, right? Like it is like a country and they can't fund themselves like a country. So you have to figure out how to collaborate because your demand for your requirements and demand is so high that you just can't do it by yourself.
Right.
And to be fair, DC is, 3,000 miles away, and it really doesn't matter who's in charge. I mean, sure, you could say one's better than the other, but California is always, secondary, like objectively, right? And it could be tertiary if one party's in charge, or secondary if another, right? And so, you kind of have to do it on your own out here. And I think that's a big advantage, that they have. And I would say the higher ed system is still fantastic here, especially if you really are, let's say at least semi-motivated, because community college is basically free, and community college has a direct path based on your GPA into either UC schools, Cal State schools, or Cal Polys. And look, if you don't want to study anything, fine, but like, it's hard to say you can't go to college out here, right? If you want to, you can. So it's a very, I think the closest thing is maybe the SUNY and the UMass systems I've seen, and Wisconsin's really good too. But the scale of this system is pretty. I mean, there's 116 community colleges. I mean, there's 57 counties. Every county basically has a community college, or almost every county. I mean, when you go to the Gold Coast, they 5 or 6 counties share one, but still, I mean, you have a pretty robust path to get there. And what one thing I think they do really well here also is they have a thing they call the public service mission. So you get more resources based on how much, so you're incentivized and it's tracked how much you integrate into K-12, or integrate into community college, or integrate into museums, whatever, when you have a public thing. And it's done at the municipal level too. So if your town isn't really integrating into your state park, or those type of things, they just get less funding, and you get rid of the people who are screwing that up, and you bring people who don't, and then you get more funding, right? So it's a pretty robust system.
Yeah. Well, anyway. All right. Yeah. So anyway, let me go. I'll call you back later, Gail.
Yep. Great times today, Jim. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jim, for everything.
Thank you, guys.
Yep. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye.